Watch out, it's a live mic.
This is Mark McNeese in New York City, and you're listening to another edition of the Live Mic Podcast. Welcome to the podcast. This is Mark, and I have a guest on this week who's also a friend. And we were having dinner recently and talked about the subject that we're going to be bringing up tonight, which was it immediately got my attention because it's something that has been an issue for me for a long time. And my guest is Lenny Gallo. He holds an MSW and an LMSW. He's a graduate of Fordham University and a licensed social worker in New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. He spent his advanced year placement at the Bergen County Jail, where he received firsthand exposure to the social injustices facing America's incarcerated population. In addition to that, Lenny is a licensed massage therapist, an actor. I've seen him on stage. He's appeared off-Broadway, and an artist whose works have been featured in the Chicago Museum of Modern Art, Paris, and London. Lenny, how are you?
I am good, Mark. How are you?
I'm really good, and it's great to finally get you online. We scheduled this a while ago because I mentioned when we started that we were having dinner here in the city, and we were getting caught up on all of our lives, and you mentioned what you were doing now as an MSW, as a social worker, and working with the incarcerated, and the whole subject of sexual assault came up, and my ears pricked up because I don't even know where my reaction comes from, but for a very long time, our culture's dismissal of sexual violence and assault behind bars has really bothered me. The turning it into jokes on sitcoms, which I've seen too many times to count, it's all just been really troubling to me. So that's our main topic. But let's start out, if you could just tell the listeners a little bit about Lenny Gallo.
Sure. Well, like you said, I started off as an actor, definitely an artist, and a massage therapist. And it's interesting because every time I'm asked the question why I became a social worker, it's kind of funny. Most of my massage therapist clients would come to see me, but most of what they wanted to do half the time was talk about, things that were going on in their lives. And most of my clientele became my talk therapy clients. And so I was like, okay, maybe we could turn this into a profession. And not that I'm not a phenomenal massage therapist, but it was one of those things where I'm like, you know what, maybe we can do something more with this. And I spent about a year soul searching with myself, decided that I wanted to help people in a deeper level than just massage therapy. And so I pursued a career in social work, and it was through my experiences at Fordham that my eyes were opened up to just the whole social injustices like humanity faces. So it really kind of launched me into this activism path. And so I kind of started off just pounding the pavement and trying to help the man who is least recognized.
Now, so because I don't really know anything about the career path or the study path, when you said you're going to be a social worker, this is what you wanted to do. Did you focus in on a specific population or specific issues?
Well, my original thought with social work was that I would help a lot of the artists and the arts community, because that's the basis of most of my life. I've been involved in the arts, but I was kind of thrown into the incarcerated population, and in having to decide on an internship and what to do. An advisor of mine at school had recommended this place in Hackensack, New Jersey, and it was the Bergen County Jail. You may have seen them on lockup, and It was, coming from a theater arts background and then saying, okay, we're going to throw you into the incarcerated population. Definitely a little intimidating, but, I have to say I fell in love with it. It's the minute I set foot in there, I how to say this nicely, I found my home. I found my place. And it truly changed my perspective on so many things. The things I learned in that environment and the things I got to witness in that environment really changed my perspective on what I was doing with my life.
Did you work with inmates one-on-one?
I did. I actually I worked with them one-on-one. I was given a lot of leeway because unfortunately nobody in terms of therapy, because the incarcerated population, everyone's like, well, no one really cares about them, so go ahead and try whatever you want. They gave me a lot of leeway in, starting a arts program. They gave me a lot of leeway in trying a bunch of different types of group therapies. And it was through that I got to really work with all different types of incarcerated individuals, from people who were substance abusers to, people who had committed more horrendous crimes like, murder, sexual assault, things of that nature. So I had a very broad spectrum approach and exposure to just about everyone in the incarcerated population.
How did you end up focusing on prison rape, for instance, for your abstract? Kind
of another thing that just kind of happened to fall upon me. A wonderful teacher of mine at the time gave us a horrendous assignment of taking a social policy apart. And she wanted the full details of it, and it had to be something that was applicable to our internship. And so I was I didn't have a lot of experience with the incarcerated population, so the only thing that I could think of at the time actually was this law that had been passed called PREA, which gave me a foundation to sort of write that paper. But in researching that, I uncovered quite a bit of information that just was like, wow, I can't believe this is what's happening in America's incarcerated population.
Well, let's talk about that now. Because I read it. I thought it was a great paper. And that was what I sort of sat up and it really caught my attention when we were talking about that at the table. Can you talk a little bit about sexual assault, the realities of it in behind bars, and then also I wanted to just talk about why our culture doesn't care or doesn't seem to care.
Well, yeah, it's a very broad topic, but yeah. We can talk about both of those things. Sexual assault behind bars, I think most people and most of your listener base, their exposure to sexual assault in prison is probably what they've seen on TV.
Yeah.
So shows like Oz, shows like, any of your great prison shows that just talk about sexual assault, more of making a mockery of it or talking about it as, the bad guy or is raping the poor innocent person. So that, I think, is people's general exposure to rape in prison. And, I think there's a sense in our culture that if you are incarcerated, that, well, you committed a horrendous crime, so on some level you should be, well, you went to jail, so if that's a part of prison culture, then, tough luck. That's what happens. And so that's, I think, America's general sense of what prison rape is about.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because that's only a tiny percent of what prison rape actually encapsulates. And there's such a greater dimension to it. Your other question, I'm sorry, you'll have to refresh my memory.
Oh, just that my observation has been all for a very long time that, as you said, it's mocked. It's our culture, our society. First of all, they don't take it seriously. There's this, always been this weird idea that a man can't rape a man or something. Either that or that if it does happen, he deserved it. You know, that he's weak, that he's feminine, that he had it coming. And we certainly think that, not me, but about the people who are incarcerated. I mean, you could go to jail for, a completely nonviolent offense, and still the public would go, well, oh, so you got raped, so what? And then in the whole prison bitch thing, I've heard so many of those jokes on sitcoms. They're never funny. They really piss me off. So that was my second point about, I don't know how the society's consciousness is ever going to be raised.
Well, and you bring up a great point. That was kind of the point I was trying to make in the paper that I had written about this, is that it is almost a tiny drop in the bucket of the bigger problem, which is the prison industrial complex. When you start to look at the entire prison system, the reason prison rape is kind of mocked and just made fun of, and people don't quite understand it, is because it's not taken seriously. And actually, you brought up a point about how somebody can go to jail on a minor offense and actually end up experiencing assault in prison, and that's actually what kind of started reform on prison rape. It was actually a specific case, Farmer versus Brennan. This actually happened back in the 1980s, where a transgendered individual who went to jail based on credit card fraud that she had committed, and she ended up getting assaulted in prison, ended up contracting HIV, and was able to sue the U.S. government. And it was sort of seen as like a landmark case that ended up starting this whole, let's take a look at prison rape on a different level.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really sort of the milestone in starting to examine prison rape as something more than just something that could be mocked on TV, something that could be, that was just the butt of a joke.
Right, and I think that for an LGBT listener or audience or population, it's important to be aware that there's a very high incidence of assaults against us in prison, and I mean transgender people. That's really a bad situation. I was reading just the other day that there might be only like two facilities or something in the country that now have separate housing for transgender inmates. It's really sad.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct on that. The LGBT community and children or adults under the age of 19, so children pretty much, are the highest individuals at risk for sexual assault in the prison and jail populations. And they become the target of not just, assault, but coercive sex as well.
Yes. And one thing I read in your paper that startled me was that the high incidence of rape, I guess I'll call it rape, are being committed by female guards.
Yes, Um,
Man, I think nobody would ever think that.
No, that was actually one of I had to take a second look at that as well and get some confirmation research on that because I couldn't believe it. What the report you're referring to? So basically, as the prisons started to look at prison rape a little bit more in depth, they wanted to take a full look at the entire spectrum of rape across the board. And so they started to include coercive sex as well, or sex that was sex that happened because, I'm going to offer you cheeseburgers, you're going to offer me something else. So that coercive sex between an employee and an inmate.
Mm-hmm.
And it was found out that most of the people who reported incidents were reporting that female officers had offered them something in exchange for a sexual favor. So that is actually brand new, just research that is coming to the forefront right now, that we're just starting to find out about some of the stuff that happens in the prison culture.
Yeah, and when I read that and thought about it, it made sense to me that some of it would be about power, because if you're in a position of authority, you can say, look, I want you to do this to me.
Absolutely.
Or I want you to have sex with me, like you said, in exchange for this, or it just simply the fact that I'm the one with the power.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it really does it puts sexual assault into sort of a new light, because, it takes that okay, now we're not just looking at, male on male rape, but we're looking at all these different forms of sex and sexual assault that are happening inside the prison system. And it really does, it does sound an alarm bell for something to be done.
Yes, and it's been a really good conversation for me. I want to ask you in closing, where do you want to go with your MSW and with your career in this?
I have to admit that I have fallen in love with the incarcerated population. I truly believe they are the most needy of help, time, energy. Part of what I would like to do is to help educate the masses on how much we need to advocate for people in the prisons. And I know that sounds like such a contradiction, but at the end of the day, 95% of people who go into jail will eventually be released. Do we want these people to come out angrier, bitter, more, come out with more criminal knowledge? Or do we want them to fully go to jail and become rehabilitated? And part of what I would like to do is be part of that movement who says we should help prisoners, we should do what it takes, we should spend the money, because we still do have the highest incarceration rates of any place in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so important that we tackle this problem. We stop, warehousing our prisoners. We stop, giving them, very little and nothing, and we start understanding what it is that got them into this situation, how we can help them and rehabilitate them, which was what prison was always supposed to do.
Right. I'm trying to see. I just lost my train of thought. But the word for anyways, it's a language thing. But you're right. It wasn't supposed to be about punishment necessarily, or strictly about punishment. It was about getting these, because what's the point of putting so many people behind bars? You have to pay for them.
Absolutely.
Better to rehabilitate who you can and have them self-supporting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is the new sort of wave of social work advocatism. activism as we move into, the new century, because people are starting to consider prisoner rights a lot more. It's not a popular thing with the public, but even just in our, little conversation about prison rape, the fact that there is so many people out there advocating for let's give prisoners their rights, let's find out what happens, let's find out what led them to this place. I mean, most people associate prisoners with being, these antisocial individuals who just cannot be helped. And that's really only about 3% of the prison population. The rest of the people in jail can be rehabilitated if we just give them the time and energy and invest our resources into that. Right now, we have this mindset of let's just put as many people in jail for minor offenses like, possession of like marijuana, which is still a touchy topic in this country. Let's throw people into jail for that, and you end up taking somebody who, if we had given the right resources to, they could be a productive member of society, but now we've kind of sentenced them to a life of crime.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're doing this. I'm glad this is your focus and your passion. And I'm really glad we finally got on the phone and were able to talk about it.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you again, Lenny. It's been great. And you're just very very easy to talk to, and you state everything very well and easily and clearly. So thank you again. I'll send you this link tomorrow, and it was a great podcast.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
You too.